It was a case that had all the hallmarks of a modern detective novel. After a ring of suspicious deaths, police began to suspect a woman, and so they hid out in her business, waiting to see if she would commit a crime. When she sold a vial of liquid to an undercover police informant, they left out and arrested her. The woman had not just been suspected in a string of murders, but her arrest would uncover a ring of conspirators whose crimes shocked the nation. It was January 31st, 1659, and the Rome Spana Poisoning ring was about to meet justice. In 1624, a woman named Giulia Mengiardi, her husband Cesare Ranchetti, and 2 daughters left Palermo, Sicily, for Rome. The 2 children were neither Giulia nor Cesare's, but Giulia's stepchildren from her first marriage, Geronima and Lucia. In the centuries that followed, legends surrounding Donna Giulia and Giulia Tofana, as she was known, proliferated. In the 19th century, one writer named her the daughter of Tofana d'Amo, a poisoner who was executed in 1633 in Palermo for murdering her husband. Further research has revealed the 2 were unrelated, although it is possible that Giulia was a disciple of Tofana and the poison supposedly invented by her, aqua Tofana. The family's flight in 1624 may have been because of suspicion that Giulia had played a part in a murder. They fled to Rome to live with an uncle who was known for his soothsaying and dabbling in other mystic arts. But after his death, Giulia and her stepdaughters bounced about, while Cesare squandered money. To make ends meet, Giulia started her own kind of business, becoming known as someone who knew how to do many things, a euphemism that referred to those involved in the secret and mystic arts. These people did a number of things, including making love potions, doing astrology, or making predictions. Giulia also acted as a go-between for various activities like facilitating loans and brokering marriages. Giulia successfully cultivated relationships with wealthy and important families all over Rome. By far the darkest part of Giulia's workings involved small glass vials of a clear, tasteless liquid. It may have looked like water, but what was in it was deadly. Eventually, Roman authorities would learn how this liquid, known to history as aqua Tofana, although the poisoners just called it aqua, was made. According to the poisoners, arsenic and lead were boiled in a jar sealed with dough until the water level dropped, and thus concentrated, the liquid could be added a few drops at a time to wine or food and would sicken those that ate it. Enough servings, and the ingester invariably died. It isn't known how many killings Giulia might have had a hand in, but her stepdaughter Hieronyma soon followed in her footsteps. Hieronyma was first married at 14 to a man who wasted his fortune chasing other women. However many he saw, that's how many he wanted, Hieronyma said. He eventually fled the city ahead of his creditors, never to return. In 1651, Giulia returned her soul to God, as the parish records put it, with no one aware of her crimes. Hieronyma took her stepmother's business and surpassed Giulia's success. She became known as l'astrologia, the astrologer. According to testimony, she added antimony to the poison. Because women weren't allowed to buy arsenic, she turned to a priest who procured it for her, Padre Don Girolamo. Spana became an important figure in Rome and hobnobbed with wealthy and influential families. The Moden's ambassador wrote that she was credited with prophesizing the election of Pope Alessandro VII in 1655. She was known to be friendly with Marcantonia Colonna, the Prince of Pagliano, whose family included the Cardinal Girolamo Colonna. Along with her famous poisons, her secrets included alchemical and medicinal recipes, along with cosmetics and perfumes. People fearing witchcraft or curses might go to Spana for help, while another time a woman brought her stepdaughter, hoping Spana could restore the girl's virginity. From the practical to the magical, Spana was one of many who crossed class lines with this hidden knowledge. One scholar called the network of this kind of information and magic an entire economy of secrecy. She cultivated the appearance of nobility. She was often called the Lady Hieronyma in parish records. Spana's network also began to expand beyond her. She had numerous sellers, several of whom would learn to make the poison themselves. One of those was Giovanna de Grandi, whose quality of life had declined over 3 successive marriages. She was introduced to her third husband by Giulia Tofana, which is how she met Spana. She also dabbled in the occult and in secrets to try to make ends meet. She was arrested several times on suspicion of crimes, and once by the Holy Office of the Inquisition, though she was always released. A second poison seller was another Sicilian, Maria Spinola, called La Secca, which possibly means the withered one. Spinola had met Hieronymus Spana by accident when their carriages were stopped near each other on a crowded Roman street in 1650. She became close friends with de Grandi as well. Maria struggled all her life with a series of husbands dying while she struggled to make ends meet. She also turned to secrets. The ring's clients, when they were looking for poisons, paid significant sums for the solution to their marital problems. If they were looking for a way out of an abusive or manipulative marriage, there were few other options. Divorce was not recognized by the Catholic Church, and getting an annulment was a difficult, long, and often fruitless endeavor. Even if successful, the woman's reputation was often ruined. One woman who chose suicide instead of the shame said, "I had to take it into consideration that all I had was my reputation." Tofana offered another way out. But eventually news of suspicious deaths was bound to alert someone. It finally made the authorities' act is unclear. Multiple stories appeared over the centuries, and each tale grew in drama and complexity. In one, after her arrest, de Grandi was freed to lead the police to her accomplishments, leading to a lengthy sting operation. In the Life of Alessandro VII, the warning came from a priest who heard a confession from a woman who claimed to have considered poisoning her husband. There's evidence that a woman who confessed to a priest was a witness in an investigation. Later tales usually give credit to the Roman governor, either for viewing a particularly lifelike corpse or simply growing suspicious of large numbers of men dying from suspicious sicknesses. Another story claims a woman poisoned her husband's soup but got cold feet and prevented him from eating it. Suspicious, the husband contacted the authorities. The transcript for Stefano Bracchi, one of the governor's lieutenants and the primary investigator, doesn't mention much, beginning the day before the sting against Giovanna de Grandi on January 31st. Grandi's mistake went all the way back to 1654 or 55, and it was that year that she entered the home of the shop of Horatio Ferry, a prosperous linen worker. His shop, in fact, sat just across the street from the Tor di Nona prison. While in the shop, she talked to Ferry's two daughters, Angelina and Elena. Soon de Grandi learned that Angelina's sister Elena felt trapped. "My husband is killing me," she told Giovanna, and showed her bruises on her thighs. "He beats me. I'm at my wit's end. Can you show me a way to get rid of him?" "Leave it to me," de Grandi said, and soon Elena had in hand a tiny vial from Spana. Soon her husband complained of a headache and fever, and then intense thirst, vomiting, and delirium. On March 23, 1655, he died, 30 years old. Shortly after, Elena's aunt, also named Elena, reported her husband sick with the same symptoms. He died on September 3rd. And that wasn't the last death, according to de Grandi. Elena's sister, Angelina, also complained that she was sick of her marriage. In October, her husband, too, was dead. 3 deaths in close proximity from an unexplainable illness drew attention. At one point, a neighbor cornered Angelina and Elena, saying, "Don't you know what they're saying about you two? They're saying you murdered your husbands with some poisonous potion." The sisters looked at each other and laughed. Worse, however, was that the women got a taste for murder. Some months later, one of the widows appeared at de Grandi's home looking for poison for a special lady friend. Despite her misgivings, de Grandi eventually gave over some of the poison with the promise of pay. De Grandi's fears were proven right when a few days later a total stranger with henna-dyed red hair appeared at her doorstep. This was Graziosa Farina, and she told de Grandi that the target was sick but not dead. De Grandi was appalled that a stranger had been invited into the conspiracy. The Ferry widows were unconcerned, and when Graziosa appeared again, de Grandi gave her a vial of well water, but did take 50 scudi in payment when the target died. The Ferry widows began to harass de Grandi for taking the money, yelling in the streets. And when she refused, they instead asked for more of the poison. "They leave me speechless," de Grandi later said. "It was like they were possessed. They came again, and their last visit was only weeks before de Grandi was arrested, with a warning that there were rumors the authorities were preparing a sting against women." The women got away with their crimes for years, partially because of some dark luck. In 1656, a plague struck Italy, eventually killing 19% of Rome's population, and with so many dying, a few more dying from poison instead of plague was hardly noticeable. Many were killed with poison in this period, including a husband of the Lady Vitalecchi and allegedly the husband of the Duchess of Ferry. After de Grandi was arrested in 1659, however, it only took a few weeks for most of the ring to be arrested. Hieronymus Spana and the Ferry widows. Quite a few more would be arrested in the coming months, including Graziosa Farina, when she was recognized walking in front of the prison. In addition to the interrogations, Stefano also conducted an investigation into the poison. He had the poison made according to their instructions and tested it on several dogs. The dogs died, while one was saved to prove the efficacy of lemon juice and vinegar as an antidote. Brocky's interrogations, usually done without torture, uncovered many potential murders, and found that the network even went beyond Rome. The poisoners themselves largely gave themselves up. The Grandies gave in quickly, confessing on February 1st. Some of the others were also quick to admit their guilt. Graziosa admitted to getting the poison from the Grandies and Spinola in her first interview. Spinola held on longer, but after several weeks gave up fighting as well. There was one more prominent poisoner caught in the web. Graziosa had quickly become involved with the ring, meeting Spinola and Spana herself. She had sought them out in connection with the daughter of a wealthy trader's daughter named Anna Marie Conti. Graziosa was acting as the go-between for yet another woman who knew how to do many things, Laura Crispoldi. Crispoldi had been contacted by Conti, who said her husband had poisoned her father and was beating her, despite the fact that she was 7 months pregnant. Crispoldi had learned about the poison from de Grandies, though she was apparently unpleasant. Graziosa called Laura a nasty piece of work. Once arrested, Crispoldi quickly confessed. The only one of the 5 who held out was Hieronima Spana. Despite repeated interrogations, Spana refused to admit that she had ever made any poison or that she had anything to do with the murders. Several witnesses accused her, including her longtime housekeeper, who saw her make the poison. When that failed to induce a confession, they arrested another woman who had killed 2 of her husbands, but who received protection from the Pope. The witnesses, to test the truth of their stories, were tortured by the strapetta, where the victim had their arms tied behind their back and then hung from the ceiling. Despite all their confessions, Spana refused to confess. In July and September of 1659, the Congregation on Crime decided the fates of the poisoners. The wives given immunity were freed, and the higher-status women never arrested, like the Duchess of Kerry. The woman who killed 2 of her husbands was sentenced to house arrest, while the Ferry widows, who never admitted guilt even in the face of torture, were banished from Rome. The 4 poison sellers who confessed were sentenced to death, and then there was the case of Hieronima Spana. Without a confession, she couldn't be convicted. The evidence, however, was significant, and the Pope signed a decree so that she could be sentenced to the usual punishment. Spana screamed insults for an hour when she heard, but finally made her confession. Their execution was set for July 5th, 1659. Their execution showed just how severe the authorities considered their crimes. Instead of being hanged out of the way, the gallows were put up at Campo de Fiore just after lunch so that the greatest number of spectators could see what happened to the poisoners. The women were led in a procession through the city to the gallows, one by one. One final woman who had poisoned her son-in-law to protect her daughter was eventually arrested and hanged on March 6, 1660. The Pope had the records of the interrogations sealed and hidden so that no one could reproduce the poison. The tale was told many times in the ensuing years, but often sensationalized. The sting became much more dramatic, and de Grandies was pushed aside in favor of Hieronima Spana, who became the central figure, usually trapped by her own hubris. These accounts were repeated and elaborated. An oft-repeated claim is that the ring killed 500 men. An actual total is unknown, as the number 500 comes from the Modenese ambassador, who wrote that the cover of the plague years made a body count difficult to ascertain, and therefore they are sounding out the possibility that the poison may have killed 500 husbands. Many of these women lived difficult lives. If their husbands beat them or cheated on them or squandered their inheritance, the husband had little to fear from his wife. That is, until the poisoners arrived, offering their insidious liquid. The plight of the women of Rome was made clear by the fact that there seemed to always be a ready market for the poison, and while many of the poisonings were uncovered, all of the women who sold the poison said that there were many more clients whose names they couldn't recall. The story was spread so widely, it was so frightening, that the name Aqua Tofana continued to be mentioned for centuries afterwards. Mozart, who died in 1791, was sure that he had been poisoned by it. The records of the initial investigation were only recently studied, and Craig Monson, in his excellent book, The Black Widows of the Eternal City, used those records to help uncover the truth behind what had become hidden by myth. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.